Mastering the Art of Unconditional Love by Daniel Rassy and Jamie Love. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, distributed, stored, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior written permission from the authors, except for brief quotations used in reviews or scholarly works. This book is intended for informational and inspirational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical, psychological, legal, or therapeutic advice. The authors are not licensed medical or mental health professionals, and the content of this book should not be used to diagnose, treat, or prevent any condition. The experiences, reflections, and insights shared in this book are based on the author's personal journey and lived understanding of relationships, love, and personal growth. Readers are encouraged to use their own discernment and seek qualified professional support when needed. Nothing in this book should be interpreted as encouragement to remain in harmful, abusive, or unsafe situations. Unconditional love, as explored here, includes self-respect, boundaries, and personal responsibility. This book explores unconditional love as a human and relational practice. Any references to spirituality are offered as personal perspective and reflection, not as absolute truth or doctrine. Readers are invited to engage with the material in a way that feels supportive, grounded, and aligned with their own values and lived experience. Part 1, Clearing the Illusions. Chapter 1, What Unconditional Love is Not. Unconditional love is not an idea the heart has to learn. It is something the heart already recognizes. Most people have felt it at least once, in a quiet moment, in the presence of a child, in a fleeting exchange that asked nothing and demanded nothing. In those moments, love did not feel heavy or effortful. It felt natural, spacious, alive. It did not require explanation. It did not ask you to disappear. It simply allowed you to be fully here. When people speak of unconditional love, they are often trying to return to that feeling. They are not chasing perfection. They are longing for a way of loving that does not cost them their aliveness, a love that does not turn into obligation, endurance, or self-erasure. That longing is not sentimental. It is intelligent. It is love remembering itself. This book begins there, not with what is broken, but with what has always been true. And from that place, we can gently look at the ways love has been misunderstood. Love, in its natural state, is not something we manufacture or earn. It is the ground we move away from when fear takes over, and the ground we return to when truth is restored. When love feels difficult, strained, or exhausting, it is not because love itself is demanding. It is because something else has been layered on top of it. Expectation, fear, survival, identity, or obligation. This chapter is not here to dismantle love. It is here to clear what obscures it, so love can move again the way it was always meant to. Unconditional love is not a moral badge. It is not proof that you are spiritually advanced, emotionally evolved, or more awake than others. Love does not keep score. It does not compare. It does not require you to perform goodness in order to remain worthy of connection. When love becomes something you do to secure safety, belonging, or approval, it quietly shifts from presence into effort. That shift is not a personal failure. It is what happens when love is learned in conditional environments. Seeing that clearly is not a loss of love. It is the beginning of freedom inside it. Unconditional love is not martyrdom. Love, when it is real, does not require you to suffer in order to be sincere. It does not ask you to prove your devotion through endurance or pain. Martyrdom arises not from love itself, but from the belief that love must be earned through self-sacrifice. Many people learn this early, often without words, through praise for being easy, through approval tied to compliance, through belonging that felt conditional on silence or self-erasure. When martyrdom enters love, love becomes heavy. Not because love has weight, but because fear has taken the lead. The heart begins to bargain. If I give enough, I will be chosen. If I stay long enough, I will be seen. If I suffer quietly, I will finally be loved. Over time, this bargaining exhausts the soul, not because love is draining, but because love was never meant to be a transaction. Unconditional love does not ask you to disappear. It does not grow stronger through your diminishment. Love expands life. It does not shrink it. Unconditional love is not emotional availability to everyone. Love is naturally open, but openness is not the same as exposure. An open heart does not mean an unguarded life. Love has intelligence. It knows when closeness nourishes and when distance preserves truth. Being loving does not require you to offer unrestricted access to your inner world. It requires presence, not permeability. When love is confused with constant emotional availability, the heart begins to tire. Not because it lacks love, but because it lacks protection. Resentment often appears here, not as a moral flaw, but as a quiet signal from the body. Something in me needs care too. Love does not shame that signal. Love listens. Unconditional love does not mean everyone receives the same intimacy, the same access, or the same version of you. Love adapts without hardening. It remains kind without becoming porous. Discernment does not diminish love. It allows love to stay true. Unconditional love is not passivity. Love is gentle, but it is not powerless. It is soft, but it is not silent. When love is mistaken for passivity, it is often because truth once felt unsafe. Needs were discouraged. Anger was misunderstood. Expression came with consequences. So love learned to stay quiet, agreeable, calm on the surface, tense underneath. But love does not require self-silencing. Love is fully compatible with clarity. It can say no without cruelty. It can draw lines without hostility. Sometimes the most loving act is to stop participating in what harms, not as punishment, not as rejection, but as an act of truth. Love can be gentle and still be firm. Love can be open and still be unmovable. Unconditional love is not spiritual superiority. Love does not elevate one person above another. It does not need to be witnessed or validated. When love becomes an identity, the forgiving one, the awakened one, the one who never reacts, it subtly shifts from presence into comparison. Love does not compete. It does not announce itself. It does not require purity. Spiritual language can sometimes be used to distance ourselves from the rawness of being human. Pain gets labeled as low vibration. Anger gets treated as regression. Boundaries get framed as failure. But love does not bypass humanity. It meets it. Love does not silence truth with concepts. It allows truth to breathe. Real love is not afraid of emotion. It does not shame feeling. It does not ask the human heart to transcend itself in order to belong. The myth that love means staying. Love is not measured by endurance alone. It is measured by honesty. There are relationships that love deeply and still outgrow. Relationships that love sincerely and still cannot be lived inside. Leaving does not always mean love has failed. Sometimes it means love has stopped pretending. Staying when truth requires departure does not make love stronger. It makes love smaller. Love does not ask you to betray yourself to prove devotion. The heart knows the difference, even when the mind struggles to accept it. The myth that boundaries contradict love. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. They are one of its natural expressions. A boundary is not a wall against connection. It is a line that protects what is real. Without boundaries, love becomes confused. It turns transactional. It begins to give in order to receive, to tolerate in order to be chosen, to help in ways that quietly erode dignity. Love can include closeness. It can also include distance. It can speak up, it can step back. Love is not the absence of limits. Love is alignment with truth. Many people must relearn this gently, especially those who were valued for being selfless or endlessly understanding. Saying no does not make you less loving. It often brings you back into love. The myth that unconditional love means you don't feel anger. Anger in its clean form is not the opposite of love. It is often love's ally. It signals violation. It protects what matters. Cruelty, manipulation, and dehumanization stand opposite love, not feeling. Anger becomes harmful when it hardens into contempt or turns into silence that corrodes from within. But anger itself is not a failure of love. Sometimes it is the moment love insists on truth. Unconditional love does not require numbness. It requires honesty without harm, feeling deeply without becoming cruel. A clean definition, so we're not floating. Unconditional love is love that is not dependent on someone meeting your inner demands in order to remain worthy of your care. It is love that stays aligned with what is true and good without turning itself into a transaction. This does not mean approval of everything. It does not mean constant closeness. It does not mean endless giving. It means love remains free. When unconditional love is present, it feels steady. It does not yank you around. It does not ask you to perform or pretend. There is a quiet coherence to it, an inner harmony where your values, actions, and self-respect move together. Love, in this sense, is not something you do, it is something you return to. Most people were never taught that love could feel like this. They learned love as sacrifice, tolerance, or endurance. This chapter exists to gently unteach that, not by replacing love with rules, but by restoring love to its natural shape. Because the greatest obstacle to unconditional love is not a lack of desire. It is forgetting what love feels like when fear is no longer leading. Unconditional love is not the life of the doormat. It is not the spirituality of self-erasure. It is not a smile over a wound. It is strength without hardness. It is truth without cruelty. It is care without captivity. And from here, we can begin to explore unconditional love not as an ideal to reach, but as a state we remember how to live from. Chapter 2. The Hidden Conditions We Don't Notice. Most people don't walk around thinking, my love is conditional. They believe the opposite. They believe they love deeply. They believe they give their whole heart. They believe they are loyal, forgiving, devoted, and sincere. And many of them truly are. The problem isn't that people don't love. The problem is that love often gets braided together with unspoken requirements. Quiet rules the heart believes it must follow in order to stay safe, valued, chosen, or secure. These rules are rarely conscious. They don't announce themselves. They operate like background assumptions, shaping how we attach, how we give, how we withdraw, and how we interpret other people's behavior. These patterns don't mean you're unloving. They mean you learned how to protect connection. These are the hidden conditions. A condition isn't always a harsh demand. Often it's subtle. It can look like a preference. It can look like a standard. It can even look like a virtue. But inside, it functions like a contract. If this happens, I can keep loving. If this doesn't happen, love will tighten, punish, withdraw, or close. That's what makes it a condition. Not the content of the rule, but the consequence that follows when the rule is broken. Some conditions are obvious, like, I'll stay with you as long as you don't cheat. That's not inherently unloving. That's a boundary. It's clear, it's honest. It's not pretending to be unconditional. Hidden conditions are different. Hidden conditions aren't spoken, they're felt. And because they are unspoken, they often turn into confusion, resentment, and emotional whiplash. People don't know what they're failing, but they sense they're failing something. They don't know what the rule is, but they feel the punishment when they break it. Hidden conditions are the reason love can feel warm one day and cold the next. They are the reason someone can say, I love you, while simultaneously trying to control you. They are the reason a person can be generous, yet resentful, loyal, yet bitter, devoted, yet quietly furious. The heart is giving, but it's giving through an invisible contract. And contracts always keep score. One of the most common conditions is, I will love you if you don't disappoint me. Disappointment is inevitable, because disappointment often just means reality failed to match an image. The image might be a fantasy of who someone should be. It might be a story of how love is supposed to feel. It might be a vision of how life is meant to unfold. When disappointment happens, the hidden condition kicks in. Love becomes withdrawal, critique, coldness, distance, or silent resentment. The person may not even realize what changed. They simply feel justified. You hurt me, you let me down. And sometimes that's true. But underneath it, there's often something more tender. I needed you to be different so I could feel safe. Another common condition is, I will love you if you make me feel special. This one hides behind romance, devotion, and even spiritual language. People call it soulmate energy or divine union or being chosen. But when you look closely, the condition is simply this: stay in the role that protects my worth. Keep reflecting back the version of me I want to believe is real. When someone stops doing that, when they become distracted, flawed, tired, human, the love begins to panic. It starts grasping. It starts demanding reassurance. It starts interpreting normal human distance as abandonment. Love becomes more about stabilizing identity than honoring truth. Some conditions come from fear of being left. Others come from fear of being seen. A person might carry the condition, I will love you if you never really know me. They give love through performance. They are kind, helpful, desirable, reliable, but they do not reveal themselves. They do not ask for what they want. They do not admit their needs. Their love becomes an offering that keeps them safe from vulnerability. This can look like unconditional love because they don't ask for much. But the truth is, they ask for something enormous without realizing it. They ask for intimacy without exposure. They ask for belonging without risk. Then there's a condition that many people don't want to admit because it sounds unkind. I will love you if you agree with me. We're taught that love should be accepting, yet disagreement can feel like rejection to an unhealed nervous system. When someone challenges our beliefs, our choices, our interpretation of events, we can feel threatened, like our reality is being pulled out from under us. So we cling, we defend, we argue, we punish with distance. We tell ourselves we're standing up for truth, but what we're often doing is protecting the self from feeling unstable. It's important to understand this. Hidden conditions are not proof that you are bad at love. They are proof that you are human. They are usually learned. Many are formed in childhood long before anyone had the maturity to name what was happening. If love was inconsistent, you learned to manage it. If love was earned, you learned to perform. If love was withdrawn when you made mistakes, you learned to become careful. If love came with emotional chaos, you learned to become the calm one. If love required you to take care of adults, you learned that being needed is how you stay connected. Conditions are often the child's attempt to create safety in a world that didn't feel stable. So when you find a condition inside yourself, the goal is not to shame it out of existence. The goal is to see it with compassion and honesty. Conditions don't dissolve under judgment. They dissolve under understanding. Because most conditions are not really about the other person. They're about the fear underneath. If this doesn't happen, I won't be okay. That's the heart of it. Many conditions revolve around one of three fears: fear of abandonment, fear of unworthiness, or fear of loss of control. A person may not consciously fear control, but they fear the chaos that comes when they don't have it. They fear being blindsided. They fear being powerless. They fear being harmed again. So they create conditions, not because they want to manipulate, but because they want to prevent pain. Conditions are often protection disguised as standards. And here's the ache. Conditions can be very reasonable in the mind while still being heavy in the heart. Someone might say, I just want honesty. But what they really mean is, I can't handle uncertainty because uncertainty reminds me of being unsafe. Someone might say, I just want you to prioritize me. But what they really mean is, when I'm not prioritized, I feel invisible, and that's an old wound. Someone might say, I just want you to communicate better. But what they really mean is, when you go quiet, I don't know if love is still there, and that terrifies me. Hidden conditions are the places where our love tries to negotiate with fear. That is why so many people struggle with unconditional love as an idea. They believe unconditional love means they should stop wanting things, stop needing things, stop being affected. But humans have needs. Humans long for safety, honesty, intimacy, reliability. Having needs is not the problem. The problem is when we secretly turn needs into ultimatums and then call the result love. The honest path is not to deny your needs. The honest path is to bring them into the light so they stop operating like invisible contracts. This is where we need a grounded distinction that sets people free. A need is a truth inside you. It is real. It deserves respect. It can be expressed clearly and cleanly. A condition is what happens when the need becomes a requirement for love itself to remain open. A need says, this matters to me. A condition says, if you don't meet this, I will close, withdraw, punish, or collapse. When people begin to notice this difference, something shifts. They start to recognize that love doesn't have to be controlled to be protected. They start to understand that love can remain real even when closeness changes. They start to see that they can honor needs without bargaining their heart. There is a deeper reason this chapter matters. Hidden conditions don't just affect how you love others. They affect how you love yourself. One of the most painful hidden conditions is, I will love myself when I become someone better. This condition sits inside millions of people. It dresses itself up as ambition or self-improvement, but underneath it is a subtle rejection of the present self. The person becomes a project. Love becomes a reward for future achievement. They don't feel worthy now. They feel worthy when. This is where many spiritual seekers get trapped. They chase unconditional love as a spiritual goal while treating themselves conditionally every day. They want to be a loving person, yet they are at war with their own humanity. They can forgive everyone else, but not their own imperfections. They can offer compassion outward, but not inward. And so love becomes something they reach for rather than something they live in. Unconditional love begins to grow when we start removing the hidden conditions from the inside out. First, in the way we relate to ourselves, then in the way we relate to others, then in the way we relate to life. That doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean abandoning standards. It doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means becoming honest enough to separate love from fear, because love is not the same thing as attachment. Attachment often says, stay close so I can feel okay. Love says, I want what is true, even if it requires maturity. Attachment often says, meet my unspoken requirements. Love says, let's speak honestly about what matters. Attachment often says, don't change. Love says, be real. And here's where the work becomes both simple and profound. Once you see your hidden conditions, you can stop acting them out unconsciously. You can bring tenderness to the places that were trying to protect you. You can begin to love without bargaining, without making your heart dependent on controlling the other person, controlling the outcome, or controlling yourself into perfection. Not because you don't care about outcomes, you do, but because love is too sacred to be used as a leash. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into why these conditions feel so powerful, why they don't dissolve just because we understand them, and why the body often closes long before the mind catches up. Because unconditional love is not an idea you impose on yourself. It is something you grow into as your inner world becomes safer to inhabit. Chapter 3: The Nervous System and the Heart. People don't fail at unconditional love because they don't understand the concept. Most people understand the concept. They can define it, they can admire it, they can even sincerely want to live from it. The place where it breaks down is not philosophy, it's physiology. It's the body. It's the part of you that reacts before you can form the perfect sentence, the part that tightens before you can remember your highest values, the part that feels threatened and begins to protect itself without asking your permission. If you have ever promised yourself you would stay loving and then found yourself becoming cold, defensive, sharp, withdrawn, or overwhelmed, you are not broken. You are not less spiritual. You are experiencing something very human. Your nervous system is trying to keep you safe. Unconditional love is often taught like a moral achievement. Like if you just think the right thoughts, practice the right mindset, and keep your heart open, you will become a person who never closes. But the heart does not float above the body. Love is not practiced in a vacuum. Love is practiced while your body is interpreting danger, while your past is rising in your present, while your energy is limited, while your stress is real, while your resources are sometimes thin. This is why this chapter matters so much, because a person can truly value unconditional love and still not be able to sustain it when their body feels under threat. This is not hypocrisy. This is biology. To understand why love collapses, you have to understand what the nervous system does. The nervous system is not just your emotions. It is the body's survival intelligence. It decides, moment by moment, whether you feel safe enough to stay open or whether you need to protect yourself. It doesn't care about your spiritual ideals. It cares about whether you are safe, whether you are resourced, whether you can handle what's happening. And it makes decisions fast. When you feel emotionally safe, your heart has space. When you feel unsafe, your heart begins to close. Not because you are unloving, but because your body is protective. People often think their heart closed because they became bitter or because they lost their spiritual connection. But the heart usually closes for simpler reasons: overwhelm, threat, exhaustion, betrayal, disrespect, unpredictability, emotional chaos. When the nervous system detects these things, it prepares for survival. And survival has a different agenda than love. Survival prioritizes control. Love prioritizes truth. Survival prioritizes self-protection. Love prioritizes connection. Survival asks, how do I keep myself from getting hurt again? Love asks, what is the most honest and humane response here? When you understand this, you stop shaming yourself for struggling. You start seeing your reactions as messages. This is where most New Thought conversations about love become incomplete. They speak beautifully about mind, belief, intention, vibration, and spiritual choice. But they often skip the reality of the body. They don't acknowledge that the body can carry fear even when the mind is committed to love. They don't acknowledge that trauma is not just a memory, it is a living imprint. It is the body remembering without words. Trauma does not always mean extreme events. Sometimes trauma is subtle, chronic, relational. It can be years of walking on eggshells. It can be emotional neglect, feeling unseen, unheard, unprotected. It can be love that was inconsistent, where closeness was unpredictable. It can be being criticized so often that you learn to brace yourself for rejection. It can be learning that conflict means danger. It can be having your feelings minimized until you stop trusting your own inner world. When those experiences are present in someone's history, the nervous system learns patterns. It learns what to expect. It learns what to brace for. And then, later in adulthood, it reacts quickly to anything that resembles the old pain. The mind might say, "This is different. This person is not my parent. This situation is not the past." But the body doesn't always update that fast. The body sees a familiar shape and prepares for impact. This is what people call being triggered, but that word has become casual, almost trendy. In truth, it's profound. It means the body has associated a present experience with a past danger. It means you are not only reacting to what is happening now, you are also reacting to what has happened before and what you fear might happen again. This is where trauma loops begin. A trauma loop is when an old wound keeps recreating the same emotional cycle, even in new situations. You feel something. You interpret it through an old lens. You react in a protective way. The reaction creates consequences. The consequences confirm the old belief, and the loop continues. For example, a person who learned that love is unpredictable may become hypervigilant. They may constantly scan for signs that something is wrong. If their partner seems quiet, they interpret it as withdrawal. Their body panics. They seek reassurance. Their partner feels pressured and withdraws more. The original fear is confirmed. See? Love disappears. The person becomes even more vigilant. This is not because they are dramatic. It's because their nervous system learned that unpredictability equals danger, and it is trying to prevent abandonment. Or someone who learned that conflict means rejection may avoid expressing needs. They stay loving. They stay agreeable. They stay calm. But inside, they build resentment because their needs go unmet. Eventually, the resentment erupts. They explode, or they shut down, or they leave suddenly. The relationship feels confusing to everyone involved. But the truth is, the person's nervous system could not tolerate honest conflict, so they delayed truth until it became explosive. Love collapses, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't feel safe enough to be real. This is why love collapses under threat. It collapses because the body interprets threat as urgency, and urgency steals your ability to remain spacious. Under threat, the body narrows. It becomes focused on survival. This narrowing is helpful when you need to run from a fire. It is not helpful when you need to have a tender conversation with someone you love. In threat states, you lose your flexibility. You lose your curiosity. You lose your generosity. Not because you are a bad person, but because your body is prioritizing protection. Fear responses tend to show up in a few recognizable ways. Some people fight. They become confrontational, critical, controlling. They try to dominate the situation so they don't feel powerless. Some people flee. They avoid, withdraw, disappear, distract. Some people freeze. They go numb, shut down, feel stuck, feel incapable of speaking. Some people fawn. They appease. They overagree. They become overly accommodating. They try to keep peace at any cost. These responses are not personality flaws. They are protective strategies. And every protective strategy has a hidden belief underneath it. Fight often believes, if I control this, I won't be hurt. Flee often believes, if I leave first, I won't be abandoned. Freeze often believes, if I shut down, I won't be overwhelmed. Fawn often believes, if I keep you happy, I'll be safe. People who most want unconditional love are often the ones whose nervous systems learned early that love was not safe. So they long for love as an ideal. They seek it as a spiritual promise. They want to become it. But when real relationship challenges arise, disagreement, misunderstanding, disappointment, distance, their nervous system reacts as if love is in danger. And in a way, it is. Not love as a divine idea, but love as a lived experience in the body. This is where emotional exhaustion comes in. When someone is constantly managing their nervous system, constantly bracing, scanning, suppressing, pleasing, explaining, overthinking, they become tired in a deep way. It isn't just physical fatigue, it is relational fatigue, the kind that makes you want to disappear, the kind that makes you stop caring, the kind that makes your heart feel like it has been carrying too much for too long. Emotional exhaustion is one of the main reasons people stop being loving. They don't stop because love is impossible. They stop because their inner resources are depleted. And when resources are depleted, the nervous system becomes more reactive. Small things feel big. Minor misunderstandings feel catastrophic. Simple requests feel overwhelming. Compassion becomes hard to access, not because you are cruel, but because you are empty. Unconditional love cannot be sustained through emptiness. It has to be supported by inner safety, emotional honesty, and enough rest that you are not living in constant survival mode. This is where coherence becomes essential. When your inner life is fractured, when your thoughts say one thing, your body feels another, and your actions move in a third direction, love begins to strain. You may say, "I'm fine," while your body is braced. You may offer kindness while suppressing anger. You may forgive in words while resentment quietly builds underneath. Coherence simply means your inner world is not working against itself. It means you are not performing love while denying what is true inside you. People often try to practice unconditional love without coherence. They try to love from an inner split. They try to keep their heart open while ignoring what hurts them. They try to forgive while still feeling unsafe. They try to be compassionate while their body is braced. And then they wonder why they collapse. The collapse is not failure. It is feedback. It is the body saying, "This is too much. This is not safe. This is not sustainable." Unconditional love is not just a decision. It is a capacity that grows as your nervous system becomes safer inside your own life, a capacity that grows as you learn to tell the truth earlier instead of later, a capacity that grows as you stop using love to override your boundaries, a capacity that grows as you rest, heal, and return to yourself again and again. This is why unconditional love is not only a spiritual practice, it is a human practice. It is practiced in your tone, your choices, your honesty, your ability to stay present, your ability to take space, your ability to return after a rupture without abandoning yourself. And it is practiced most powerfully not when everything is easy, but when you feel threatened and you still choose the cleanest, most humane response available to you. Not the perfect response, the clean response. In the next part of the journey, we'll begin to explore how to build that capacity from the inside, how to become the kind of person whose love has weight, steadiness, and truth because it is supported by an inner life that is no longer at war with itself. Part 2, The Inner Work of Love. Chapter 4, Self-Containment, Inner Coherence, and the Foundation of Love. Unconditional love does not begin in relationship. It begins in the way you hold yourself when no one else is there to do it for you. This is where many people get lost. They try to love outwardly before they are supported inwardly. They try to be generous, forgiving, open, and understanding while quietly abandoning themselves in the process. Then they wonder why love feels fragile, why it collapses under pressure, or why it slowly turns into resentment. This chapter marks a turning point. Up until now, we have been clearing illusions about love, about sacrifice, about endurance. Now we move into the ground that actually supports love. Not performance, not intention, not positive self-talk. Support. The word self-love has been used so often that it has almost lost its meaning. For some, it conjures images of affirmations in the mirror. For others, it sounds indulgent or self-absorbed. For many, it feels abstract, something they are supposed to have but don't quite know how to access. That's why this book does not begin here with cultivating self-love. Love that lasts does not grow from slogans. It grows from something quieter and far more practical. Self-containment. Self-containment means you are able to stay present with your own inner experience without fleeing from it, fixing it, overriding it, or handing responsibility for it to someone else. It means your emotions are allowed to exist without becoming emergencies. It means your needs can be felt without becoming demands. It means you can be with yourself in discomfort without collapsing or hardening. This is not emotional detachment. It is emotional capacity. When self-containment is missing, love becomes urgent. You need reassurance. You need responses. You need closeness to regulate your inner state. And when those things are not available, love turns anxious, controlling, or withdrawn. When self-containment is present, love has room to breathe. You can want connection without panicking when it wavers. You can care deeply without losing your center. This is where inner coherence begins to matter in a very practical way. When your inner life is aligned enough that your thoughts, emotions, and actions are not constantly pulling against each other, love stops feeling like an effort. You are no longer acting loving while internally protesting. You are no longer saying yes while bracing for impact. You are no longer offering kindness at the cost of truth. Coherence does not mean comfort. It means integrity inside your own experience. At the heart of self-containment is self-compassion. Not as sentiment, but as safety. Self-compassion is often misunderstood as being soft on yourself or excusing harmful behavior. In reality, self-compassion is the ability to stay present with your own pain without turning against yourself. It is the opposite of inner violence. Inner violence sounds like relentless self-criticism, harsh judgment, pressure to do better, and impatience with your own humanity. Many people speak lovingly to others while waging war inside themselves. They push themselves through exhaustion. They shame themselves for emotional reactions. They tell themselves they should be healed by now, wiser by now, calmer by now. A nervous system cannot feel safe in that environment. Self-compassion creates safety by removing the threat of self-punishment. When you make a mistake, when you feel triggered, when you react in ways you don't like, self-compassion says, I am still with you. That presence alone changes everything. It allows the body to soften. It allows learning to happen without fear. It allows growth without humiliation. This is not indulgence. This is stability. Without self-compassion, people try to practice unconditional love while constantly policing themselves. They monitor their thoughts. They correct their emotions. They judge their reactions. They demand spiritual maturity on a timeline. This creates tension. Love practiced under pressure becomes brittle. Love practiced in safety becomes resilient. Forgiveness of self lives here as well, but not in the way it's often taught. Self-forgiveness is not about excusing behavior or bypassing responsibility. It is about releasing the internal punishment that keeps you trapped in the past. Many people believe they must keep shaming themselves in order to stay accountable. They fear that if they let themselves off the hook, they will become careless or harmful. In reality, sustained shame does not produce integrity. It produces paralysis, defensiveness, or quiet despair. Self-forgiveness is the moment you stop turning your pain into a weapon against yourself. It is the decision to let remorse teach instead of torment. It is allowing yourself to move forward without dragging your worst moments behind you like proof of unworthiness. When self-forgiveness is absent, people often seek redemption through overgiving. They try to earn relief by being endlessly loving to others. But love offered as penance is not free. It is heavy. It asks too much of everyone involved. Unconditional love cannot grow in soil watered by self-punishment. Healing inner wounds also belongs here. And this is another place where people misunderstand the work. Healing is not fixing what is broken. Healing is not forcing resolution. Healing is not turning pain into a project. Many wounds persist not because they haven't been analyzed enough, but because they haven't been met without judgment. Inner wounds often formed in moments when something essential was missing: safety, attunement, protection, understanding. The wound itself is not the event. It is the impact. And that impact lives in the body as expectation. This is what love feels like. This is what I should prepare for. Healing begins when those expectations are gently challenged through lived experience, including the experience of being with yourself differently. When you meet your own fear without shaming it, you are healing. When you allow sadness without rushing to positivity, you are healing. When you honor anger without turning it into cruelty, you are healing. There is no timeline for this. There is no ideal outcome to chase. Healing is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming safe enough inside yourself that old wounds no longer run the present. This safety is what allows you to become internally resourced. Being internally resourced means you are not dependent on external circumstances to remain emotionally regulated. It does not mean you don't need people. It means you are not empty without them. It means you can rest in yourself. You can self-soothe. You can take space. You can ask for support without collapsing if it isn't immediately available. You can receive love without clinging. You can give love without depletion. People who lack internal resources often confuse intensity with intimacy. They mistake emotional highs and lows for depth. They bond through crisis. They feel alive in chaos. But love that requires constant activation is not sustainable. It burns hot and fast, then burns out. Internally resourced love is quieter. It has weight. It has steadiness. It does not need constant reassurance to exist. It does not disappear the moment something is uncomfortable. It is not threatened by pauses, differences, or distance. This is why unconditional love begins here, not as affirmation, not as identity, not as an ideal, but as self-containment. When you can stay with yourself, you stop using love to escape yourself. When you can hold your own emotions, you stop asking others to regulate them for you. When you are supported inside, love becomes an offering rather than a request. This does not make you less relational. It makes you more available in a real way. You are no longer loving from hunger. You are loving from fullness. Not perfection, not constant calm. Fullness as in enoughness, enough safety, enough presence, enough self-respect to remain open without collapse. From this foundation, unconditional love stops being something you try to do and becomes something you are capable of sustaining. And from here, the work deepens. Not outwardly yet, but inwardly, in the ways love is tested when it meets expectation, disappointment, and the longing to be met. That is where we go next. Chapter 5. Letting go of judgment without lying to yourself. Judgment is one of the most misunderstood forces inside the human mind. In spiritual circles, it's often treated like a stain, something shameful that proves you are not evolved enough. People try to scrub it away with positivity. They try to outrun it with affirmations. They try to rise above it with spiritual language. And then it sneaks back in through the side door, sharper than before, because it was never actually understood. Judgment is not a spiritual sin. It is an ancient human function. It formed long before modern spirituality existed, long before you had a personal growth vocabulary, long before you ever tried to become more loving. Judgment is the mind's way of sorting the world. It categorizes, it evaluates, it decides what seems safe, what seems risky, what seems admirable, what seems threatening. It is built into human survival. The problem is not that judgment exists. The problem is what happens when judgment becomes your identity, your worldview, your posture toward life. The problem is when it hardens into contempt, superiority, dismissal, or self-hatred. The problem is when judgment stops being a momentary assessment and becomes a permanent lens. If you want unconditional love to be real, you have to become fluent in this difference. Because most people don't actually want to stop judging. They want to stop suffering inside their judgments. They want to stop feeling tense and tight. They want to stop living in constant critique of themselves, of others, of life. They want to keep discernment, keep clarity, keep standards, keep self-respect without carrying bitterness as a daily companion. That is possible, but it requires honesty. A useful starting place is this: judgment is information. It tells you something about your values, your history, your fears, your boundaries, your unresolved pain. It tells you what you consider acceptable, what you consider dangerous, what you feel you must protect. It often tells you what you needed but didn't receive. It also tells you where you are still tender. When you judge someone harshly for being selfish, sometimes it reveals your value of generosity. Sometimes it reveals an old wound of being used. When you judge someone for being too emotional, sometimes it reveals your value of composure. Sometimes it reveals the fear of getting overwhelmed by other people's feelings. When you judge someone for being lazy, sometimes it reveals your value of effort. Sometimes it reveals an old belief that rest is unsafe, that you must prove your worth through productivity. Judgment is rarely random. This is why shaming yourself for judging doesn't work. It adds a second layer of judgment on top of the first. Now, you're not only judging the person, you're judging yourself for judging the person. The inner world becomes more tense, not more free. Letting go of judgment begins with allowing it to speak without letting it drive the car. This is where people get confused. They think letting go of judgment means you have to pretend you don't see what you see. They think it means becoming naive. They think it means you have to approve of behavior that harms. They think it means you must adopt a soft, permissive stance toward everything, like a spiritual doormat with a smile. That is not unconditional love. That is denial. Love without truth is not love. It is fantasy. And fantasy is fragile. The goal is not to stop seeing clearly. The goal is to stop turning clarity into cruelty. Judgment often begins as protection. Before it becomes hardened, it usually starts as a quick attempt to keep you safe. The mind sees something and says, that looks dangerous, or that feels wrong, or I've been hurt by this before. And then it forms a judgment to create distance. In its earliest form, judgment is not hatred. It is caution. But if you don't understand the fear underneath it, judgment grows teeth. When fear is unresolved, judgment becomes more rigid. It stops being a moment of evaluation and becomes a fixed story. People like that are bad. People like that can't be trusted. People like that should be avoided. And then, without realizing it, you start seeing the world through a narrow tunnel. You stop meeting individuals. You meet categories. You stop being curious, you become certain. You stop being open, you become defended. This is how judgment hardens into something that feels like righteousness. And righteousness can feel powerful, but it is rarely peaceful. Righteousness is often a way to avoid vulnerability. If you can label someone as wrong, you don't have to feel the tenderness underneath. You don't have to admit you were hurt. You don't have to admit you're afraid. You don't have to admit you miss them. You don't have to admit you're disappointed. You don't have to admit you feel powerless. Righteousness turns pain into superiority, so you don't have to feel the pain. This is not always conscious. Most of the time, it happens in good people who have been hurt and don't know what else to do with the hurt. The same dynamic happens inwardly. Self-judgment often begins as an attempt to prevent future pain. The mind thinks, if I criticize myself enough, I'll improve. If I shame myself enough, I won't fail. If I stay harsh, I won't get hurt again. It's a misguided attempt to control outcomes. But inner harshness does not create freedom. It creates a cage. And when you live in a cage internally, your love becomes guarded. You become less patient with others because you are not patient with yourself. You become less compassionate because your inner world is already tense. You become quick to punish because you are used to punishment as a motivator. This is why letting go of judgment is not just a relationship practice. It is a liberation practice. And liberation does not mean blindness. It means seeing with depth. Discernment and judgment are not the same. Discernment is clear seeing with calm. It says, this is healthy, this is not, this is safe, this is not. This aligns with my values, this does not. It does not need to insult anyone to know what it knows. It does not need to humiliate to be accurate. It does not need to exaggerate to feel justified. Judgment in its hardened form is clarity mixed with contempt. It is clarity mixed with emotional charge. It makes the other person smaller so you can feel safer or superior. It doesn't just notice behavior, it assigns identity. It doesn't just say that action was harmful. It says you are harmful. It doesn't just say this isn't for me. It says you are beneath me. Even when it's subtle, even when it's internal, the energy is the same, separation. You don't dissolve judgment by forcing yourself to love everyone. You dissolve judgment by staying honest about what you see while refusing to dehumanize. That is the exact edge where unconditional love becomes real. Because unconditional love does not mean unconditional closeness. It does not mean unconditional access. It does not mean unconditional trust. Trust is earned. Access is chosen. Closeness is relational. Love is deeper than all three. Love says, I will not deny your humanity even if I cannot be close to you. Love says, I will not turn you into a monster to justify my boundary. Love says, I can walk away without needing to hate you to feel strong. This is one of the highest forms of inner mastery. It also means you don't turn yourself into a monster when you make mistakes. You don't dehumanize yourself. You don't use inner cruelty as a form of discipline. You stay truthful and firm without becoming violent inside your own mind. If judgment is information, what is it telling you? Sometimes it is telling you, this crosses my boundary. Sometimes it is telling you, This reminds me of something that hurt me. Sometimes it is telling you I'm afraid. Sometimes it is telling you I envy something in them I haven't claimed in myself. Sometimes it is telling you I have not healed this yet. The point is not to believe every judgment. The point is to listen for what it reveals. And then the release begins naturally. Not because you forced yourself to be non-judgmental, but because you no longer need judgment to protect you. When you are internally supported, you don't need to harden to feel safe. When you trust your ability to set boundaries, you don't need contempt to hold your ground. When you can tell the truth cleanly, you don't need cruelty to feel powerful. When you are willing to feel the tenderness underneath your reactions, you don't need righteousness to cover it. This chapter dissolves the lie that love requires naivety. It doesn't. It requires depth. It requires the courage to see clearly without turning your clarity into a weapon. You can be discerning and loving. You can be firm and compassionate. You can be honest without becoming cruel. That is what it means to let go of judgment without lying to yourself. Chapter 6, Loving Without Needing Reciprocity. Most people believe they understand love until they don't get it back. That is not an accusation. It is simply one of the clearest mirrors life offers. Because the moment love is not returned in the way we hoped, when the message isn't answered, when the warmth isn't matched, when the effort feels one-sided, when someone we care about stays distant, something inside us reveals itself. The heart feels the ache, yes. But beyond the ache, something else often rises. Bargaining, resentment, collapse, withdrawal, self-doubt, even quiet hostility. And then we realize, sometimes painfully, that our love was carrying an expectation we didn't fully admit. Most people are not aware of what they were hoping for until the hope is disappointed. Reciprocity is natural. Wanting it is not a weakness. Human love is relational. We are wired to seek response, connection, attunement. It is healthy to desire mutual care. The trouble begins when reciprocity becomes the condition under which love is allowed to remain open. Then love is no longer a gift. It becomes a trade. And trades always keep score. Sometimes the scorekeeping is obvious, sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it hides inside fairness or effort or respect. Sometimes it wears the mask of maturity. But inside, it feels the same, a tightening, a measuring, a quiet internal ledger that says, after everything I've done, or if you really cared, or I wouldn't treat you this way, so why are you treating me this way? The moment the ledger appears, love becomes strained. It becomes heavy. It becomes less free. Unmet expectations poison love, not because expectations are evil, but because many expectations are unspoken. And what is unspoken becomes a trap. If you don't name what you're hoping for, you can't clarify it, negotiate it, release it, or choose differently. It simply sits in the heart like a silent demand. The other person doesn't know the rules, but they still get punished when they break them. You may not punish them overtly. You may punish them with distance, with coldness, with reduced tenderness, with less generosity, with that subtle shift people can feel even when nothing is said. And often you punish yourself too. This is where people start to unravel. They interpret lack of reciprocity as proof they are unworthy. They assume, if I were more lovable, they'd show up. If I were more attractive, more calm, more spiritual, more impressive, more low maintenance, then I'd be met. They turn another person's limitations into an identity statement about themselves. They start performing for love. They start shrinking. Or they start trying harder in ways that don't come from fullness, but from hunger. Love offered from hunger becomes anxious. It becomes compulsive. It becomes exhausting. Loving without needing reciprocity is not about pretending you don't care. It's not about becoming indifferent. It's not about training yourself to accept crumbs with a smile. It's not spiritual self-denial. It is something far more grounded and far more powerful. Loving without needing reciprocity does not mean denying your needs. You can name them clearly. I need safety. I need consistency. I need closeness. And then tell the deeper truth without drama or punishment. This relationship can meet these needs, or it cannot. Unconditional love lives in the space where you do not turn that truth into self-blame or resentment. You do not punish yourself for needing, and you do not punish the other person for their limitation. Sometimes a lack of reciprocity is not simply about the other person's capacity. Sometimes it is information about how you are showing up. This does not mean something is wrong with you. It means there is room for clarity. Ask yourself honestly, am I clearly expressing my needs, or am I hoping they will be sensed? Am I offering closeness while hiding parts of myself to stay safe? Am I giving in ways that feel generous on the surface but resentful underneath? Am I asking for what I need directly, or am I trying to earn it through effort? When reciprocity is missing, the work is not to assume fault, nor to assign blame. The work is to become precise. You can acknowledge your part without turning it into self-punishment. You can recognize where you were unclear, indirect, avoidant, or overgiving, and still hold compassion for why you learned to love that way. Sometimes love is not returned because the other person cannot meet you. Sometimes love is not returned because they do not know how to meet you. Sometimes love is not returned because you have not yet learned how to stand fully in what you are asking for. There is another truth that must be spoken carefully because it is often avoided or oversimplified. Sometimes love is not returned because harm occurred. Sometimes something you did, intentionally or not, crossed a line, broke trust, or created pain that changed the other person's willingness to meet you. And even when you take responsibility, even when you apologize sincerely, even when you change your behavior, the relationship does not return to what it was. This does not mean your accountability was false. It does not mean your growth was meaningless. And it does not mean you are owed renewed closeness. Repair does not guarantee reconciliation. One of the hardest maturations of love is learning to hold this without collapsing into shame or turning accountability into self-punishment. You can acknowledge that you caused harm and accept that the other person may no longer feel safe, willing, or able to meet you in the same way. Unconditional love does not say, because I've changed, you must come back. It says, I take responsibility for what I did, and I respect your right to choose what happens next. This is where love becomes dignified. You do not use guilt to pull someone closer. You do not demand forgiveness as proof of healing. You do not punish yourself forever to prove remorse. You grieve what was lost. You integrate the lesson. You carry the change forward, even if the relationship does not. Sometimes loving without reciprocity means accepting that your growth arrived after the cost was paid. And love remains real, not because the relationship is restored, but because you no longer abandon your integrity trying to undo the past. Unconditional love lives in the space where you tell the truth about all three possibilities, without collapsing into shame and without hardening into resentment. It is about keeping your heart free. To keep your heart free does not mean you keep everyone close. It means you refuse to make your openness dependent on someone else's performance. It means you don't hand over the steering wheel of your inner life to another person's response. It means you allow yourself to feel disappointment without collapsing into bitterness. You allow yourself to want more without turning your wanting into a weapon. You allow yourself to grieve what isn't being returned without turning grief into self-abandonment. This is where self-containment becomes essential again, not as an idea, but as lived strength. When you are not contained inside yourself, you will attempt to get containment from others. You will need their reassurance to calm your fear. You will need their attention to soothe your loneliness. You will need their agreement to steady your uncertainty. And then, when they don't provide it, you will feel destabilized. You will feel like you are falling. But when you are internally supported, love becomes cleaner. You can offer care without needing it to come back in the same form. You can give without leaking yourself. You can be present without begging to be met. Leaking energy is what happens when love becomes a strategy for survival. Some people love as a way to secure belonging. They overgive so they won't be left. They anticipate needs so they won't be rejected. They become indispensable so they won't be abandoned. They offer love as insurance. And the tragedy is, the more they do this, the less free they feel. They may appear loving on the outside, but inside they are working. They are managing. They are performing. They are afraid. This is not love as a gift. It is love as a coping mechanism. Love without leaking energy is love that does not require you to betray your own center. It does not require you to keep pouring from an empty place. It does not require you to keep offering warmth in situations where warmth is being exploited. It does not require you to keep reaching into distance as if distance will suddenly become closeness because you tried harder. Love does not have to chase. This is a hard truth for tender-hearted people. Many tender-hearted people are also determined people. They don't give up easily. They believe in people. They see potential. They understand pain. They can feel another person's inner world, and it makes them compassionate. That compassion is beautiful. But it can become a trap when compassion is used to override reality. Reality matters. If someone is consistently unavailable, love does not require you to keep proving your devotion to their absence. If someone cannot reciprocate in a meaningful way, love does not require you to keep offering more and more until you disappear. If someone only receives your love when it benefits them, love does not require you to keep participating in that imbalance. Loving without needing reciprocity is not the same as staying in one-sided relationships. This chapter is not a permission slip for self-erasure. It is a liberation from bargaining. Bargaining is the quiet deal we make with life. If I love you well enough, you will love me back. If I forgive enough, you will change. If I stay kind, you will finally see me. Bargaining can feel noble, but it is heavy. It makes love conditional while pretending it's unconditional. It places your inner peace in someone else's hands. It turns your heart into a worker. You can love someone and still stop bargaining. You can care and still accept what is real. You can remain warm and still move your life in a direction that nourishes you. This is what it means to free love from outcome without becoming cold. Coldness is often a defense against disappointment. A person gets hurt and decides, never again. They shut down not because they lack love, but because love has been painful and they don't know how to remain open without being naive. Coldness says, I won't feel anything so nothing can touch me. That is protection, not freedom. Freedom is different. Freedom allows feeling without captivity. Freedom allows love without attachment to control. Freedom allows closeness without clinging. Freedom allows distance without hatred. It is possible for love to remain present even in distance. This is one of the quiet miracles of mature love. You may not be in someone's life the way you once were. You may not speak often. You may not be seen. You may not be understood. And yet your heart does not need to turn them into an enemy to justify your separation. You can hold them in your care without staying entangled. You can bless their path without walking it with them. This is not weakness. This is strength without bitterness. Sometimes, loving without reciprocity means you stop offering love in the form someone wants and you offer it in a form that is true. You stop offering access and you offer goodwill. You stop offering emotional labor and you offer respect. You stop offering intimacy and you offer clean distance. You stop offering constant availability and you offer a silent kindness that does not drain you. Love can be quiet and still be real. And sometimes the deepest act of love is allowing yourself to face what hurts without turning that hurt into a demand. You let yourself grieve. You let yourself feel disappointed. You let yourself admit you wanted more. You let yourself admit you hoped they would choose you. You let yourself admit you tried. You let yourself feel the tenderness under the story. Then you return to yourself, not in bitterness, not in superiority, not in the posture of, I don't need anyone. You return in honesty. You return in self-respect. You return with the dignity of a heart that refuses to bargain with its own worth. When you stop needing reciprocity to remain loving, something powerful happens. Your love becomes simpler. It becomes cleaner. It becomes less manipulative without you even trying. It becomes an offering you can stand behind because it is not a strategy. And from that place, you can finally ask a different question. Not, how do I get them to love me back? But what does love look like here without betraying myself? Chapter 7. When your heart closes and what to do instead. There are moments when love doesn't feel available, not because you stopped caring, not because you became bitter or unspiritual, but because something inside you tightened, your chest closed, your patience vanished, your tenderness pulled back. The warmth you're known for went quiet, and in its place appeared irritation, numbness, distance, or a sharp edge you didn't plan on showing. This happens to everyone, yet many people feel ashamed when it happens. They tell themselves they failed at love. They judge the contraction instead of understanding it. They try to force themselves back into openness before they're ready, which only creates more inner strain. Or they do the opposite. They harden, justify the closure, and decide that being guarded is simply who they are now. Neither response is honest. A closing heart is not a moral failure. It is a protective response. The heart closes when the nervous system senses threat. Sometimes the threat is obvious: aggression, betrayal, disrespect, unpredictability. Sometimes it's subtle: being misunderstood, not being met, having your truth dismissed, feeling emotionally alone in the presence of someone who is supposed to care. The heart does not analyze these moments. It reacts. It pulls inward to protect what feels exposed. This contraction is intelligent. It exists for a reason. But here is what is essential to understand. The heart is responding to the present through the lens of the past. In the moment of contraction, something current is happening: a tone, a look, a withdrawal, a conflict. But the intensity of the reaction is often not coming from that moment alone. It is coming from stored emotional pain that was never fully processed when it first occurred. Many people learned early in life that certain experiences were too overwhelming to feel safely at the time they happened. Fear had to be swallowed. Anger had to be hidden. Grief had to be quiet. Needs had to be minimized. Love had to be managed. The nervous system adapted by containing these experiences instead of completing them. That adaptation was intelligent. It helped you survive. But what was contained did not disappear. It remained in the body as tension, guarding, readiness, and expectation. Not as a memory you think about, but as a pattern the body prepares for. So when something in the present resembles the original wound, even faintly, the body responds as if the past is happening again. The heart closes not because the present moment is unbearable, but because the past once was. This is why people are often confused by their own reactions. They know intellectually that this situation is different. They know the person in front of them is not the same as the person who hurt them before. But the body does not respond to logic. It responds to resemblance. This is what triggers are. Triggers are not overreactions. They are current experiences activating unresolved past pain. That pain can show up in different ways. Some people respond with aggression, some withdraw, some appease, some shut down. Emotional shutdown, in particular, is often misunderstood because it looks calm. A person goes quiet. They stop engaging. They may even seem reasonable. But inside, feeling has become too much, so the system goes numb. This is not indifference. It is overwhelm. Then there is silent resentment, the most corrosive response of all. This happens when the heart closes, but the person stays. They keep showing up physically, but emotionally they pull away. They stop giving freely. They keep score. They replay conversations internally. They say yes when they mean no. They tell themselves they are being loving while quietly punishing the other person with distance, coolness, or withdrawal of warmth. Silent resentment is not cruelty. It is grief that never felt safe enough to be expressed. What all of these responses have in common is contraction. The heart pulls inward because it does not feel safe enough to remain open. Many spiritual teachings emphasize the importance of keeping the heart open. Some suggest that suffering persists because we resist what arises, and that freedom comes from remaining open and relaxed. For many people, this teaching resonates deeply, and yet it often feels impossible to live. That is because the heart can tighten before awareness has a chance to intervene. This is not a failure of consciousness. It is a reflex. When reflex is treated as a moral error, spirituality becomes another form of self-correction. People try to override their nervous system with ideals. They tell themselves they should be loving when what they actually need is safety. They shame the closing instead of listening to it. The inner world splits, one part braced and afraid, another part insisting everything is fine. This is not freedom. It is strain. So the real question is not whether the heart ever tightens. The real question is what happens after it tightens. There is an important difference between contraction, hardening, and armoring. Contraction is the initial reflexive response. It is momentary. It is information. By itself, it is not the problem. Hardening is what happens when contraction is held onto. The heart doesn't just tighten, it judges. Pain turns into certainty. Vulnerability feels too costly, so rigidity takes its place. Armoring goes further still. Armoring is when closure becomes an identity. I don't trust. I don't need. I don't feel. At this point, the heart is no longer protecting you from harm. It is protecting you from contact. The work is not to prevent contraction. The work is to remain aware enough that contraction does not become a permanent state. This is where awareness becomes practical rather than philosophical. Awareness does not mean thinking about the reaction. It does not mean explaining it. It does not mean judging it or spiritualizing it. Awareness means staying present with the physical and emotional experience without suppressing it and without acting it out. When contraction happens, the nervous system is activating a survival response that was once interrupted. Awareness allows that response to be felt and completed in a way that was not possible when the original pain occurred. This is how old pain releases. Release does not happen because you understand the pain intellectually. It happens because the body finally experiences the emotion without danger, without abandonment, and without self-judgment. The nervous system learns, through experience, that the feeling itself is survivable. As stored pain releases, the nervous system updates. It no longer needs to react with the same intensity. The heart does not have to close as quickly or as tightly because the original reason for closing has been resolved. This is how the capacity for love grows. Not by forcing openness, not by pretending nothing hurts, not by normalizing permanent closure, but by healing what once required protection. Reopening does not mean re-entering the same conditions. You can reopen with boundaries intact. You can soften without surrendering your ground. You can feel love without resuming closeness. Sometimes reopening is simple, breathing again, letting sadness replace anger, allowing disappointment instead of pretending indifference. Other times, it takes longer. Distance may be needed. Rest may be needed. Grief may need time. Love does not demand immediacy. It respects timing. The most important thing to understand is this: a closing heart is not the enemy of love. Staying closed out of fear is. When contraction is met with awareness, it can move. When old pain is allowed to process, it can release. When pain releases, the heart naturally opens again. This is how love matures, not by never closing, but by learning how to notice contraction, stay present, and allow what is old to complete without turning your humanity into a flaw. From here, love does not become fragile. It becomes resilient. Part 3, Love and Relationship. Chapter 8. Love is not the same in every relationship. Unconditional love is often described as universal, and in a deep sense it is. It is love that is not held hostage by performance, approval, control, or fear. It is love that can remain present, even as circumstances change. But when people hear the word unconditional, many unconsciously translate it into something else: sameness. They imagine that if love is real, it must be expressed equally to everyone, with the same intimacy, the same access, the same emotional availability, the same closeness, the same sacrifice. This is where love quietly loses its magic. This book is not about becoming endlessly available. It is about becoming internally trustworthy. Love is not meant to be flattened into a single shape. Love is one essence, but it moves through many forms. When we forget this, we either force intimacy where it does not belong or withhold love where it is actually natural. We confuse holiness with homogeneity. And in doing so, we drain love of its intelligence and its wonder. If you have ever loved a child, you already know this. Not intellectually, but instinctively. The love you feel for a child does not resemble the love you feel for a partner, a friend, or a parent. It doesn't even resemble the love you feel for another child. And yet, you never question whether it is love. You don't panic because it feels different. You understand without needing explanation that love takes its shape from the relationship itself. The love we feel for our children is often described as profound, but that word still doesn't quite capture it. There is something immediate, ancient, and deeply embodied about it. For many parents, especially mothers, the bond begins before language, before story, before conscious choice. A mother and her baby share not just affection, but rhythm, breath, nervous system, attunement, presence. The infant does not love through effort or reciprocity. The love flows through connection itself. It is protective, instinctual, and awe-filled. When your child is your own, your offspring, the bond often carries an added layer of recognition. Not ownership, but continuity. Not possession, but lineage. There is a sense, sometimes quiet and sometimes overwhelming, that life itself has extended through you. Many parents describe moments of looking at their child and feeling something wordless rise in the chest, a devotion that feels older than thought, a tenderness that reorganizes the heart. This love is special, and it is meant to be. What makes it sacred, however, is not that the child is meant to meet the parent emotionally. It is sacred precisely because it does not require reciprocity. It is love that flows outward without asking to be returned. Love that says, I will hold you while you grow. Love that is strong enough to be asymmetrical. When this distinction is honored, parental love becomes one of the most expansive expressions of unconditional love available to a human being. It awakens patience. It deepens humility. It softens the heart without asking the child to carry the adult. But when this love is misunderstood, when a child is asked, even subtly, to regulate adult emotions, provide meaning, or offer emotional stability, the same love can become heavy for the child and confusing for the parent. The magic of parental love lies in protection, not extraction. Romantic love carries a different magic altogether. When two adults meet in love, especially when the connection feels aligned, mutual, and deeply seen, love can feel unifying in a way that is both human and transcendent. Many people describe it as recognition, as if something ancient has clicked into place, as if the soul has found a mirror, not to complete it, but to meet it. This is the love people often call soulmate love or divine union. This love is special too, not because it is superior, but because it is mutual. Unlike parental love, romantic love invites reciprocity. It asks for presence on both sides. It thrives on shared reality, honesty, intimacy, and responsibility. It is love that says, I will walk with you. And because it is mutual, it also carries risk. It requires trust. It requires discernment. It requires standards. Devotion in partnership is not proven through endurance alone, but through truth, spoken kindly, lived consistently, repaired when broken. Unconditional love in partnership does not mean unconditional tolerance. It means love that does not turn into cruelty when disappointed. Love that does not weaponize vulnerability. Love that can hold boundaries without withdrawing humanity. A mature partnership is not sustained by intensity alone, but by coherence. Two people remaining whole while choosing each other. Love with parents is often the most complex of all because it carries history. Many people believe unconditional love means they must feel warmth toward a parent regardless of what occurred. Others believe it means total severance. In truth, love in this relationship often takes the form of clarity, grief, and dignified boundaries. Sometimes love looks like closeness. Sometimes it looks like distance that protects the life you are building now. Not punishment distance, not revenge distance. Distance that says, I will not abandon myself to repeat what hurt me. With friends, love is chosen. Friendship thrives on resonance, shared values, and mutual care over time. It is voluntary, which is part of its beauty. But that also means it is sensitive to imbalance. When one person consistently gives and the other consistently takes, love does not disappear, but the form can no longer hold it. Unconditional love does not require you to remain in imbalance. It allows you to step back cleanly, without bitterness. With strangers, love takes its most spacious form. It looks like respect, courtesy, restraint, and the refusal to dehumanize. It does not seek intimacy. It does not demand closeness. It simply says, you matter too. This is not relational love. It is a stance toward life. And then there is the relationship that underlies all others, the relationship with yourself. If you attempt to love others unconditionally while treating yourself with contempt, your love will eventually fracture. You will overgive and resent. You will say yes and collapse. You will preach compassion while privately punishing yourself for having limits. Love cannot remain free outwardly when it is violent inwardly. The way you love yourself is not separate from the way you love others. It is the ground from which the rest grows. This is why flattening love causes harm. It confuses love with access. It confuses love with softness. It confuses love with endless tolerance. And it pressures people to erase themselves in the name of virtue. But real love does not erase distinction. It honors it. Unconditional love is not sameness. It is steadiness. It is the quality of your inner stance as love moves through different relational realities. Love that adapts without disappearing. Love that remains human without becoming porous. Love that can be tender with a child, mutual with a partner, respectful with a stranger, discerning with a parent, and honest with itself. When love fits the relationship it is in, it stops harming in the name of holiness. It stops leaking life force. It stops demanding self-erasure as proof of goodness. It becomes what it has always been at its best, a living intelligence. One that knows how to protect, how to soften, how to commit, how to let go, and how to remain open without losing itself. That is not lesser love. That is love, fully alive. Chapter 9. Boundaries are an act of love. Boundaries have been misunderstood so thoroughly that many people feel tension the moment the word is mentioned. They imagine conflict, they imagine coldness, they imagine rejection, or they imagine a hardened version of self-protection that feels more like a wall than a truth. And because spiritual culture has often romanticized openness, many sincere people quietly fear boundaries. They worry that having limits makes them less loving. They worry that saying no makes them selfish. They worry that if they set a boundary, they will lose connection, lose approval, or lose the identity they've built around being the understanding one, the patient one, the one who can handle everything. But love without boundaries is not pure. It is porous. Porous love does not stay loving for long. It becomes strained. It becomes resentful. It becomes performative. It quietly turns into a bargaining system where you give more than you have, then hope the other person will finally see you, appreciate you, choose you, or change. When that doesn't happen, love doesn't simply fade. It tightens, it hardens, it curdles into bitterness, wearing a polite face. A boundary is not a punishment. It is clarity. Clarity is one of the most loving energies a human being can offer. It removes confusion. It removes guesswork. It removes the emotional fog where resentment and manipulation quietly grow. A clean boundary simply names what is true, what you can do, what you cannot do, what you are available for, and what you are not. This is not rejection. It is self-respect made visible. Most people do not fear boundaries because boundaries are wrong. They fear boundaries because boundaries reveal reality. If you say no, you may discover someone only felt close to you when you were convenient. If you ask for respect, you may discover someone benefited from disrespecting you. If you stop overgiving, you may discover how much of the relationship depended on your self-abandonment. Boundaries illuminate dynamics that were already present but hidden by silence. They reveal whether love can remain present when access is no longer unlimited. The pain that follows is not caused by the boundary. It comes from finally seeing what was already there. When love is steady and truthful, the nervous system relaxes because it no longer has to brace for abandonment. Safety does not come from endless self-protection. It comes from reliability, from knowing where you stand, from relationships where needs can be named, limits can be honored, and responsibility is shared rather than avoided. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are requirements for what love must be able to hold in order to remain real. In many relationships, love is mistakenly measured by how much you will tolerate. Endurance is praised as devotion. Self-erasure is mistaken for kindness. Being endlessly available is confused with being spiritual. But unconditional love is not proven by how much harm you can absorb. It is proven by how cleanly you can remain human while refusing what degrades love. A boundary says, I will not participate in what diminishes us. That is not punishment. That is protection of your life, your dignity, and the relationship itself. When boundaries are set with care, they do something unexpected. They often restore warmth. When you stop forcing yourself past your own limits, your body relaxes. When you stop saying yes against yourself, your nervous system softens. When you stop pretending you are okay with what you are not okay with, tenderness returns naturally. Boundaries do not make love colder. They often make love more genuine, because love is no longer being extracted. This is where it matters to say something clearly. How a boundary is set is just as important as the boundary itself. A loving boundary is not delivered through anger, contempt, or emotional cutoff. It is not thrown like a weapon. It is not used to punish, dominate, or disappear. A loving boundary is communicated with presence, with steadiness, with empathy. It can acknowledge the other person's feelings without taking responsibility for them. It can say, I understand this hurts without saying, I will override myself so you don't feel pain. Love does not require cruelty, to be honest. At the same time, boundaries are often misunderstood in another direction, as a substitute for communication. This is where spiritual bypass quietly enters the room. Not every boundary is actually a boundary. Some are avoidance. A true boundary keeps you present. A wall removes you from contact. From the outside, they can look identical. Inside, they feel very different. A true boundary is usually grounded, even if it is uncomfortable. There may be sadness, guilt, or grief, but there is also clarity and steadiness. You are still willing to be human. You are still willing to communicate cleanly. You are not trying to disappear. Avoidant boundaries are often driven by unresolved fear. They come with shutdown, righteousness, numbness, or the urge to vanish. They are often justified with spiritual language, protecting my energy, not engaging in low vibration, I don't owe anyone anything. But underneath is usually a fear of conflict, vulnerability, or emotional intensity. This is the simplest way to discern the difference. Am I willing to communicate this boundary clearly and kindly, or am I using distance to avoid that discomfort? A true boundary can usually be spoken. A wall often cannot, because speaking would require presence. That does not mean you owe everyone a conversation. Distance is appropriate when communication has already been attempted and ignored, when there is manipulation, aggression, or harm, or when remaining present would require self-betrayal. In those cases, distance is not bypass. It is self-respect after clarity has failed. But distance chosen instead of clarity is often fear, not love. Boundaries do not replace communication. They require it. This is why boundaries are not cold. They are precise. They say, I care enough about truth to name it. They say, I respect you enough not to lie with my silence. They say, I will not stay connected through confusion. Some people will meet boundaries with respect. Those relationships deepen. Love becomes safer because it no longer has to brace. Others will respond with anger, guilt, blame, or withdrawal. They may call you selfish. They may say you've changed. They may accuse you of being cold. But what they are often reacting to is not harm. It is the end of unchecked access. And this matters. Someone can feel hurt by your boundary and still be wrong about you. A boundary can disappoint someone without being unloving. It can activate their abandonment fear without being abandonment. You are not responsible for making your truth painless to someone who benefited from your lack of truth. Boundaries are compassion with spine. They are what keep kindness from becoming brittle. They are what keep generosity from turning into resentment. They are what allow your yes to be real, because it is no longer coerced by fear or guilt. They also clarify the difference between helping and enabling. Helping supports growth. Enabling prevents it. Helping strengthens capacity. Enabling removes responsibility. Enabling often looks like love, but underneath it is fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear of letting someone struggle. A boundary is what keeps care clean. It says, I can love you without carrying you. Boundaries do not need to be dramatic. They can be quiet, simple, firm without hostility. They do not require long explanations or emotional defenses. The more you argue for your boundary, the more you unconsciously ask for permission. A boundary is not a request. It is a statement of reality. What makes boundaries trustworthy is not intensity. It is consistency. This is where many people struggle. They can set a boundary, but they cannot tolerate the emotional weather that follows. They feel guilt. They feel discomfort. They feel the pull to repair the other person's feelings. So they abandon their boundary, not because it was wrong, but because discomfort feels like danger. This is why boundaries are not only relational. They are inner work. They teach you to stay present while emotions move. They teach you to remain kind without becoming controllable. They teach you that love does not require self-betrayal to survive. This is where unconditional love becomes real, not as sentiment, but as integrity. Because unconditional love is not the absence of limits. It is the absence of hostility inside the limit. You can say no without contempt. You can create distance without punishment. You can refuse what harms while still wishing the other well. You can protect yourself without closing your heart. Boundaries are not the place where love ends. They are the place where love stops lying. They are love choosing to become trustworthy, inside you and between you and others. And when love is trustworthy, it no longer needs to beg, barter, disappear, or prove itself through sacrifice. It can simply be what it has always been at its best: clear, steady, humane, and strong enough to remain open without being broken. Chapter 10. Loving those who cannot meet you. One of the quiet heartbreaks of being human is realizing that love does not guarantee mutuality. You can care deeply and still not be understood. You can show up consistently and still not be valued. You can offer softness and still be met with distance, confusion, deflection, or emotional absence. And when this happens, especially if you are someone who loves sincerely, you may interpret it as a personal failure. You may ask yourself what you did wrong, what you failed to communicate, what you should improve, what you should soften, what you should tolerate. You may spend years trying to earn a kind of meeting that the other person simply does not have the capacity to give. This chapter is for that ache, because there is a form of love that becomes distorted in these situations. It starts as devotion, but slowly becomes chasing. It starts as compassion, but turns into overfunctioning. It starts as patience, but becomes self-erasure. And the most painful part is that it can all be done in the name of love, while the self quietly disappears in the background. Unconditional love is not the practice of trying harder. It is the practice of staying loving without abandoning reality. Some people cannot meet you, not because they don't care at all, but because their own inner world is limited in ways they may not even understand. They may have never learned how to be emotionally present. They may equate vulnerability with danger. They may have grown up in environments where feeling was punished or ignored. They may be trapped in self-protection so habitual that they experience it as personality. They may be so defended that closeness triggers them. They may be so consumed by their own pain that they cannot make room for yours. They may love you in the only way they know how, but it may not be the way you need. This is one of the most sobering truths in love. Sincerity does not equal capacity. And when you don't know that, you will keep trying to extract capacity from someone by giving more. You will keep offering proof of devotion as if proof is what opens a heart. You will keep expanding your generosity, not realizing that the very thing you are doing to keep love alive is what is draining the life out of you. The longing for reciprocity is not wrong. It is human. It is natural to want to be met. It is natural to want the warmth you give to return to you. But the moment you turn reciprocity into a condition for your love, love becomes bargaining. And the moment you turn your love into a bargaining chip, you will start giving in ways that are not clean. You will give with a hidden please. You will give with a quiet expectation. You will give with an invisible contract that says, if I love you well enough, you will finally become who I need you to be. That contract is the birthplace of resentment. Not because the other person is always malicious, but because your heart cannot sustain love that must continuously prove itself in order to be received. So the work here is delicate. It is not to become detached. It is not to become numb. It is not to pretend you don't care. The work is to allow love to remain in you without turning it into overgiving. This is where love becomes spacious instead of performative. Performative love is love that tries to produce a result. It is love that is always doing, always explaining, always reaching, always repairing, always pairing, always hoping, always carrying. It can look noble, it can look devoted, but underneath it often carries fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone in the relationship. Performative love is exhausting because it is not truly free. It is effortful love, love that must stay in motion to avoid the grief of what is not being returned. Spacious love is different. Spacious love is love that does not need to convince. It does not need to chase. It does not need to beg. It can remain present without grasping. It can feel tenderness without turning tenderness into strategy. Spacious love does not deny longing, but it does not obey longing at the cost of self-respect. Spacious love does not mean the heart has gone numb. It often means the heart has grown strong enough to remain open without needing to be fed. The tenderness is still there. The care is still real. What has changed is not the love itself, but the compulsion to keep proving it. Love is no longer working to be chosen. It is resting in its own integrity. Spacious love tells the truth without drama. It says, I care about you. And it also says, I see what is possible here. And it also says, I will not keep paying for connection with my own depletion. This is one of the hardest places to mature because it requires you to stop confusing effort with love. Many people have been conditioned to believe that if they stop reaching, they stop loving. But that isn't love. That is compulsion. That is the nervous system trying to stabilize itself by earning closeness. Love does not require you to abandon your life. When someone cannot meet you, love often becomes quieter. Not colder, quieter. It stops trying to force intimacy. It stops trying to extract responsiveness. It becomes less persuasive and more real. It may take the shape of a silent blessing rather than a long conversation. It may take the shape of respectful distance rather than constant contact. It may take the shape of kindness without invitation. It may take the shape of not escalating. It may take the shape of not making them the enemy in your mind. This kind of love is often misunderstood because it does not perform warmth. It does not prove itself. It does not keep pleading for connection. It simply refuses to turn the relationship into a battleground. It remains human, but it stops trying to make the other person capable. There is grief in this, and the grief should not be bypassed. When you love someone and they cannot meet you, you are not only grieving them, you are grieving the imagined relationship you kept trying to create. You are grieving the version of them you kept hoping would arrive. You are grieving the future you pictured when you believed love would naturally become mutual if you stayed devoted enough. Let that grief be honest, because honesty is what frees love from obsession. Many people remain entangled because they refuse to grieve. They keep hoping because hope feels better than the sorrow of accepting limitation. But ungrieved hope becomes attachment. It becomes the rope that keeps you tied to someone who cannot hold you. This is where presence replaces engagement. Presence is not the same as participation. Presence is an inner stance. It means you do not need to shut down your humanity. You do not need to become cruel. You do not need to punish. You can still care. You can still wish them well. You can still speak respectfully. You can still keep your heart free of hatred. But you no longer need to engage in the endless dance of trying to be met in ways the other person cannot offer. Presence might look like being calm and kind when you interact, without trying to extract emotional depth from the moment. Presence might look like holding your boundaries without hostility. Presence might look like reducing contact without turning it into punishment. Presence might look like accepting the limitation of the relationship while keeping your own spirit intact. This is where many people discover something surprising. Love becomes easier when it stops demanding proof. It becomes lighter, cleaner, more honest. Not because you care less, but because you are no longer trying to use love to control reality. You may still choose closeness in some cases. Not every limited person is unsafe. Not every unresponsive person is harmful. Some relationships can deepen over time. Some people can grow. But the chapter you are reading is not about forcing growth. It is about choosing love without self-betrayal. This is the difference between staying loving and staying available. You can remain loving without offering unlimited access. You can remain kind without being constantly engaged. You can remain compassionate without becoming the emotional caretaker of someone who refuses to meet themselves. You can remain respectful without continuing a dynamic that diminishes you. Unconditional love in this context is not sentimental. It is strong. It is love that refuses to harden, but also refuses to collapse. It is love that does not need to win the person. It is love that does not need to be chosen back in order to remain true inside you. And perhaps the deepest transformation of all is this: you stop using the other person's capacity as the measure of your worth. You stop using their response as your mirror. You stop trying to earn what can only be freely given. You love them as they are. You love yourself enough to stay whole. And you allow love to be what it is at its highest here: spacious, quiet, honest, and free. Part 4, Living from Unconditional Love. Chapter 11, Human Love as the Gateway to Divine Love. Many people speak about divine love as if it belongs to a separate realm, something accessed only through special states, sacred experiences, or spiritual purity. It is often imagined as an escape from the messiness of human relationship, as if the heart must outgrow the personal in order to touch the universal. But this view quietly misunderstands what divine love actually is. Divine love is not a departure from humanity. It is the flowering of it. It does not replace human love. It matures through it. The heart is trained in the everyday, not by theories, not by idealism, not by beautiful language. The heart is trained by friction, responsibility, disappointment, forgiveness, tenderness, repair, patience, truth-telling, and the humbling moments that arise when you attempt to love real people instead of imagined ones. Human relationship is one of the most demanding classrooms on earth, and it is also one of the most sacred. Not because it is always pleasant, but because it asks the heart to become larger than its reflexes. It asks love to become something you live, not something you merely believe in. This is why human relationships matter. They are not a detour from spiritual life. They are where spiritual life becomes visible. A person can meditate for years and still remain immature in love if they never have to practice love with anyone who challenges them. They can speak about compassion while becoming defensive when criticized. They can talk about oneness while punishing the people closest to them with silence, distance, or contempt. This does not mean inner work is unimportant. It means peace felt in isolation does not automatically translate into love lived in relationship. The heart becomes free not only by feeling expansive, but by remaining humane when it is tested. And human love is the test. It is easy to love in abstraction. It is easy to love humanity from a distance. It is easy to love when you are admired, understood, or soothed. The refinement of love happens when you are tired, disappointed, misunderstood, or triggered, and you choose not to turn your heart into a weapon. It happens when you learn to hold boundaries without hatred, speak truth without humiliation, repair without groveling, and forgive without erasing yourself. Human love trains the heart because it forces love to confront its own conditions. This is where divine love becomes practical. Divine love is not a mood. It is not a fleeting sweetness or a spiritual high. It is not a state that makes life feel perfect. Divine love is an expansion of capacity. It is the heart's ability to remain present with life without needing life to be easy. It is the ability to meet what is real without collapsing into fear, control, or bitterness. And if that capacity is genuine, it must be able to live inside ordinary human experience. Inside conflict, grief, responsibility, disappointment, longing, and repair. If divine love cannot touch your human life, it becomes an idea rather than a force. This is where a necessary distinction must be made, because many sincere seekers become confused here. Feeling pure divine love is not spiritual bypassing. There are real experiences of unity, boundless compassion, deep peace, and profound connectedness that are authentic and transformative. These experiences can soften defenses, heal the nervous system, and remind the heart of what is possible. They are not illusions. They are not mistakes. Spiritual bypassing does not occur because divine love is felt. It occurs when divine love is used to avoid what still needs to be lived, felt, or integrated. When a spiritual state becomes a way to skip grief, dismiss anger, avoid boundaries, bypass responsibility, or rise above unresolved pain, love is no longer expanding life. It is floating above it. True divine love increases capacity. It does not erase humanity. It deepens it. It makes you more able to stay present in discomfort, more willing to tell the truth cleanly, more capable of holding boundaries without hostility, and more available for repair when harm occurs. If a spiritual experience leaves you less embodied, less relational, or less honest, it has not yet been integrated. If it leaves you more grounded, more humane, and more capable of love in real life, it is doing exactly what divine love is meant to do. This is the difference between divine love as escape and divine love as expansion. Escape says, I want love that frees me from the discomfort of being human. Expansion says, I want love that makes me more fully human, more awake, more honest, more capable of tenderness without self-betrayal and truth without violence. Expansion is what the heart is actually seeking. Human love is often the doorway because it begins with something personal. A face, a voice, a child, a partner, a friend, a parent, a stranger who surprises you with their vulnerability. A moment where you could have stayed defended but chose to remain human. These moments may seem small, but they are the heart's true training ground. They teach you how to love without certainty, give without control, remain kind without becoming weak, and stay present when your reflex is to withdraw. Over time, something changes. At first, love is often mixed with grasping. You love, but you want reassurance. You love, but you want proof. You love, but you want to be chosen back. You love, but you fear loss. You love, but you try to manage outcomes. This does not make your love false. It makes your love human. But as the heart matures, love becomes less about securing yourself and more about being true. It becomes less tense, less urgent, less bargaining. It becomes cleaner. Love begins to feel spacious. Spacious love is not distant or detached. It is not cold. It is not indifferent. It is simply no longer cramped by fear. It can hold longing without becoming needy. It can hold closeness without possession. It can hold grief without turning it into bitterness. It can hold difference without turning it into threat. This spaciousness is not avoidance. It is capacity. It is the felt sense that the heart can hold more without collapsing. Unconditional love does not give an excuse not to meet others' needs. It is not the stance of you should love me exactly as I am, regardless of how I behave. Love does not erase impact. It does not absolve responsibility. And it does not mean that care, presence, responsiveness, or repair no longer matter. Human love is the training ground precisely because it requires these things. Divine love does not float above responsibility. It deepens it. For many people, this is the first taste of what they recognize as divine love, even if they don't use that language. Because divine love feels like inner expansion. It feels like compassion without self-erasure, forgiveness without denial, clarity without cruelty, strength without armoring. It feels like being able to remain open without abandoning yourself. And this capacity is not reserved for saints. It is trained in ordinary moments. When you pause instead of snapping. When you tell the truth instead of people-pleasing. When you admit you were wrong without collapsing into shame. When you let someone be disappointed without rescuing them. When you take responsibility for your side of the street without managing theirs. When you refuse to harden, even as you refuse what is harmful. When you love someone and still let them be who they are, instead of trying to remake them into a version that will finally make you feel safe. That is the gateway. Human love matters because it is embodied. It forces love to take shape in the nervous system, in the voice, in the choices you make when no one is applauding your growth. It forces love to become more than an idea. It becomes a way of living. And as you live it, love stops feeling like something you perform and starts feeling like something you can trust inside yourself. Not as an identity or a spiritual badge, but as steadiness. You may still feel anger. You may still need boundaries, rest, and time. But beneath those waves, something stabilizes. A quiet refusal to weaponize pain and a willingness to return to openness without self-betrayal. Divine love, at its truest, is not elsewhere. It is here, inside your capacity to live from the heart in the middle of real life. It is not an escape from relationship. It is what relationship is capable of awakening in you. And when it awakens, it does not float above the world. It moves through it, quietly, steadily, unmistakably, making your presence a kind of blessing, not because you are perfect, but because love has become real in you. Chapter 12. Forgiveness as liberation, not obligation. Forgiveness has been used as a spiritual weapon so often that many people flinch at the word. They don't flinch because they are bitter. They flinch because they have seen forgiveness demanded in situations where it was unsafe, premature, or dishonest. They have watched forgiveness used to silence truth. They have watched communities praise forgiveness while ignoring harm. They have watched abusers quote spiritual language to avoid accountability. They have watched tender-hearted people force themselves into being the bigger person while their body quietly screamed no. So before anything else, the truth needs to be said clearly. Forgiveness is not a moral requirement. It is not proof of spiritual maturity, and it is not something you owe anyone. Forgiveness, at its highest, is liberation. Not liberation for the person who hurt you. Liberation for you. Because unforgiveness is not simply a decision. It is often a bond. Not a loving bond, but a painful one. A tether made of replay, rumination, clenched memory, and unfinished emotion. When forgiveness has not occurred, the nervous system remains in contact with what happened, even when the person is gone. The body stays braced. The mind keeps returning. The heart tightens to protect itself from being hurt again. This is understandable. It is also exhausting. Forgiveness is the releasing of that tether. Not by pretending what happened didn't matter. Not by rewriting history into something nicer. Not by labeling harm as a lesson before your heart is ready to call it what it was. Forgiveness releases pain. It does not revise the truth of what occurred. Real forgiveness begins with honesty. Honesty about what happened, what it cost you, what it changed, what you lost, and what you still feel. Many people cannot forgive because they skip this step. They try to jump to peace without passing through truth. But peace built on denial is fragile. It cracks the moment life touches the wound again. Forgiveness that liberates is not forced. It is organic. It arrives when the inner world is ready to release, and readiness cannot be bullied into existence. This is why forgiveness must respect the nervous system. If your body still feels unsafe, it will not release the story. It will not soften the protective anger. It will not loosen its grip. You cannot override this with affirmations. You cannot command your nervous system to trust. You can only create conditions where safety becomes real enough that release becomes possible. And sometimes the first act of forgiveness is simply this. You stop demanding that you be over it by a certain date. You stop shaming yourself for still feeling what you feel. You stop using spirituality as a whip. In that gentleness, something begins to thaw. Levels of hurt. One reason forgiveness becomes so distorted is that people talk about it as if all wounds are the same. They are not. Not all hurts deserve the same process, the same weight, or the same timeline. Some hurts are small, misunderstandings, poor timing, miscommunication, momentary insensitivity. When clarity arrives, the pain dissolves quickly because the nervous system was never deeply threatened. Some hurts are relational but repairable. Patterns of neglect, boundary crossings without malice, repeated disappointments. These require conversation, accountability, and time. Forgiveness here is often gradual, unfolding alongside repair. And some hurts are deep: betrayal, abuse, chronic disrespect, violations of safety. These wounds live in the body. They affect identity, trust, and survival. Forgiveness here is not a decision. It is a process, sometimes a long one, and sometimes forgiveness does not include reconciliation. Treating all wounds as equal pressures people into bypass. Respecting that the wound protects truth. Levels of forgiveness. Forgiveness also unfolds in layers. There is cognitive forgiveness, where you understand what happened and why. This brings clarity, but not necessarily freedom. There is emotional forgiveness, where anger, grief, shock, and sadness are allowed to move. Without this, forgiveness becomes performative. There is nervous system forgiveness, where the body no longer reacts as if the harm is still happening. The memory loses its charge. This cannot be forced. There is relational forgiveness, where you decide how or if you continue relating. This level is optional. Forgiveness does not require access, trust, or reconciliation. And there is existential forgiveness, where the wound no longer defines who you are. The past loosens its grip on your identity. This is where liberation truly arrives. People move between these levels in their own time. Skipping levels is what causes harm, what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not condoning, it is not minimizing, it is not excusing, it is not pretending. You can forgive and still know the behavior was wrong. You can forgive and still set boundaries. You can forgive and still choose distance. You can forgive and still pursue accountability. Forgiveness is not the cancellation of truth. It is the refusal to keep bleeding internally from something you can no longer change. Another distortion is the belief that forgiveness must lead to reconciliation. This has harmed many people. Reconciliation is relational rebuilding. Forgiveness is internal release. They are not the same. Some people are not safe. Some people do not change. Forgiving them does not mean making them your companion again. It means they no longer live inside your nervous system as a permanent threat. When forgiveness becomes avoidance, there is also a kind of forgiveness that looks spiritual but is actually self-abandonment. It is offered quickly while the body is still raw. It avoids conflict, grief, and anger. This forgiveness does not liberate. It returns later as bitterness, shutdown, or resentment, because what was never processed cannot be released. Liberation requires contact with reality. Sometimes forgiveness begins very quietly. You stop replaying. You stop tracking their life. You stop hoping they finally understand. You simply admit, I don't want to carry this forever. That sentence begins to shift your loyalty away from pain. Forgiveness is often described as letting go, but what you are really letting go of is the belief that you must stay tight to stay safe. That tightness once tried to protect you. It did its job, and now it may be ready to rest. Tightness is not loyalty. It is imprisonment. and yet it was once an attempt at care. Self-forgiveness. Often, the deepest forgiveness is not toward the person who hurt you, but toward yourself. Toward the version of you who didn't see it coming, who stayed too long, who ignored intuition, who tried to earn love by shrinking, who didn't yet have the tools you have now. Self-forgiveness is not letting yourself off the hook. It is ending inner violence. It is allowing learning. It is deciding you do not need ongoing punishment to prove you deserve better. When self-forgiveness arrives, the wound loosens. You stop carrying pain as proof of worth. You reclaim your life. Forgiveness is not a performance of goodness. It is a private release. A quiet moment when your system realizes it no longer has to stay braced against the past. No formulas, no pressure, no spiritual demands, just the steady reclaiming of your freedom. And when forgiveness is real, it does not make you smaller. It does not make you naive. It does not erase truth. It makes you unburdened. It makes your love lighter. Not because you forgot what happened, but because you no longer live inside it. Chapter 13. When love becomes the way you see. There comes a moment in the maturation of love when it stops being something you feel occasionally and starts becoming the way you experience reality itself. Love is no longer limited to certain people, moments, or conditions. It becomes a lens, a quiet orientation of the heart, a way of meeting life with openness rather than defense. You feel love for existence, for humanity, for the sheer mystery of being alive. And when this happens, a question sometimes arises, not as fear, but as curiosity. If love is everywhere, do I disappear? If I can feel care for many people, will the people closest to me still feel chosen? If love becomes universal, does anything remain special? This question isn't philosophical. It's personal. It comes from the part of the heart that wants to matter deeply to someone, not just generally, but specifically. It's the part that wonders, if love isn't scarce anymore, will I still be held the same way? The answer is not what people expect. When love becomes the ground of your experience, it does not flatten connection. It clarifies it. Specialness does not disappear. It relocates. Love as a lens is impersonal in its reach, but deeply personal in its expression. It does not erase difference. It allows difference to be met without threat. You do not love everyone in the same way because love is not sameness. Love is intelligence. It knows how to take shape. The love you feel for life itself is not the same as the love you feel for your child. The love you feel for humanity is not the same as the love you feel for your partner. The love you feel for existence does not replace the love that is built through shared history, devotion, responsibility, and care. It simply removes fear from the equation. For many people, love has been intertwined with intensity, with longing, with scarcity, with the sense that love must be protected, defended, or earned in order to remain alive. In that framework, love feels magical because it is unstable. It feels electric because it is fueled by uncertainty. It feels special because it is rare. When love matures, that electricity quiets. And to a nervous system trained on intensity, quiet can be mistaken for emptiness. This is where people sometimes say, it doesn't feel the same anymore, when what they really mean is, it doesn't feel anxious anymore. But quiet is not absence. Quiet is depth without noise. When love becomes the lens through which you see, what falls away is not magic, but volatility. What dissolves is the belief that intimacy must be dramatic to be real. What softens is the pressure placed on your closest relationships to carry the full weight of your worth, your aliveness, your meaning. This is not a loss. It is a relief. Intimacy does not require scarcity to remain sacred. It requires presence. A child is not special because you do not care about other children. A child is special because of bond, responsibility, attunement, and the profound intimacy of care. A partner is not special because you are incapable of loving others. A partner is special because you choose them again and again in truth, because of shared life, shared nervous system, shared reality. Love does not become diluted when it expands. It becomes steadier. And steadiness is what allows intimacy to deepen without fear. When love is no longer rationed, you stop clinging. When love is no longer scarce, you stop guarding. When love is no longer something you must secure, you stop testing it. You can be kind to strangers without it threatening your devotion. You can feel goodwill toward humanity without it diminishing your bonds. You can love life itself without losing the exquisite specificity of connection. In fact, the opposite happens. When love becomes your way of seeing, your closest relationships often become more intimate. Not because they are exclusive, but because they are no longer burdened by fear. You are not asking them to prove your worth. You are not using closeness as oxygen. You are not confusing intensity with depth. You are present. Presence is the real form of specialness. To be loved deeply is not to be loved dramatically. It is to be loved reliably. It is to be seen without being managed. It is to be chosen without being competed for. It is to be held with care, even when you are not at your best. A heart that can love widely is often a heart that can love deeply, because it is not fragile. It does not harden easily. It does not withdraw as punishment. It does not need to threaten to be felt. This is not ordinary love. This is mature love, and it does not make life dull. It makes it vivid in a different way, less frantic, more textured, more alive in the subtle places where meaning actually lives. Love as a lens does not erase intimacy. It frees intimacy from fear. It allows love to be both the ground of your being and the fire of connection. It allows devotion to be chosen, not demanded. It allows specialness to be recognized, not defended. And when love lives like this, it no longer needs to announce itself. It is felt, quietly, steadily, unmistakably. Chapter 14. Mastery is not perfection. The moment unconditional love turns into an ideal you are supposed to live up to, it stops being love and becomes pressure. It becomes another internal standard, another quiet measuring stick, another way to correct yourself for being human. Many people approach spiritual growth as if mastery means outgrowing reaction altogether, as if the goal is to never feel anger, never withdraw, never get tired, never need space, never falter, never close, never feel the old reflexes rise. But that version of mastery isn't freedom, it's denial wearing a sacred costume. Real mastery is not cleaner than life. It is more honest about it. You will still react. You will still feel anger. You will still have days when your patience is thin, when your heart is less available than you hoped it would be, when something sharp slips out before you can soften it, when you pull back too quickly or feel the familiar tightening move through your body. None of this disqualifies you from unconditional love. It does not mean the work failed. It means you are alive inside a nervous system that remembers, protects, and responds. What changes over time is not whether these moments happen, but how long you stay lost inside them. Unconditional love does not ask you to erase your humanity. It asks you to stop turning your humanity into a weapon against yourself. It lives in the space where you can see what's happening without collapsing into shame or defending your reaction as destiny. It lives in your willingness to come back to what you know is true, to what feels clean inside you, to the part of you that no longer wants to live inside the residue of unprocessed pain. This returning is the real practice. Not returning to look evolved. Not returning to perform goodness. Returning because you recognize the cost of staying fused to reactivity. Because you value your inner stability. Because you no longer want to carry yesterday's charge into today's relationships. Because love matters more to you than being right, more than winning, more than protecting an image of yourself. Over time, this return changes the texture of your inner life. You stop forcing kindness while resentment quietly builds underneath. You stop performing calm while bracing for impact. You stop saying yes when your body is already saying no. What you feel, what you know, and how you act begin to move in the same direction again. Not because you fixed yourself, but because you stopped splitting yourself in two. Love becomes simpler, not easier, but simpler. There is less internal cleanup, less emotional debris, less confusion. This book is not about becoming endlessly available. It is about becoming internally trustworthy. From here, self-respect stops being something you have to remind yourself about. It becomes the ground you stand on. Your time matters. Your limits matter. Your body's responses matter. Your truth is allowed to take up space without being used as a weapon. This is what keeps unconditional love from sliding into martyrdom. It is what allows your heart to stay open without becoming an open wound. It is what makes your compassion trustworthy instead of compulsive. And mastery includes rest, not as a reward for doing the work well, but as part of how love stays real. Many people try to love from depletion. They try to stay generous while exhausted, patient while overwhelmed, open while braced. but the body cannot sustain what the spirit imagines. If unconditional love is going to be lived rather than idealized, it has to be embodied, and embodiment requires rest. Recovery, solitude, support, laughter, stillness, time away from people, time where you are not offering, holding, or fixing anything for anyone. A rested heart loves differently, not because it is morally better, but because it is resourced. This is where spiritual ideals sometimes become quietly cruel. They ask the heart to remain open without acknowledging that the heart lives inside a human system with limits. When those limits are ignored, love becomes strained and brittle. When they are honored, love becomes steady. Not perfect, steady. It also matters to say this plainly. There will still be relationships that stretch you beyond what you expected. There will still be people you cannot reach. You will still be misunderstood. You will still feel disappointment. There will be moments when someone crosses a line and your body responds before your mind can soften the edges. There will be times when distance is necessary. Times when forgiveness is not available yet. Times when walking away is the most loving choice you can make. None of this makes you unspiritual. It makes you honest. Perfection is a myth the ego uses to stay in control. Mastery begins when you no longer need that control. It shows up when you can tell the truth without cruelty, set boundaries without hatred, feel anger without letting it harden, be disappointed without closing, be wrong without collapsing into shame, repair without losing your dignity, love without possession, care without controlling outcomes. This is not an abstract ideal. It is lived moment by moment, through 1,000 quiet choices no one applauds. And the most powerful of those choices is the choice to return. When you notice yourself performing love instead of living it, when you catch yourself bargaining or keeping score, when you feel yourself hardening or abandoning your own truth just to stay comfortable or right. Returning is not weakness, it is strength. It is the strength to stop feeding the part of you that wants to make pain permanent. Unconditional love is not soft in the way people imagine. It does not float above life. It has weight. It has spine. It is the strength to remain human in a world that rewards closure. The strength to stay kind without becoming naive. The strength to stay open without becoming porous. The strength to hold truth without turning it into a weapon. This is not a path you walk once and complete. It is a path you return to, again and again, not as punishment, but as practice. Not to become perfect, but to become free. And when freedom arrives, love stops being something you perform to prove you are good. It becomes something you live because it is what you are choosing to protect in yourself. Your integrity, your dignity, your tenderness, your presence, your willingness to return. This is what mastery looks like. Not flawless, not untouchable, not above life, but real. And real love lived this way is not fragile, it is quietly unstoppable.